There are documents that can take your money, there are documents that can take your house, and then there is one document that can take you. This is the story of the stranger at the door. Rudy and Rennie North were in their mid-70s. They had been married for 57 years. They lived in their own home in a quiet community in North Las Vegas, a retirement they had earned, surrounded by their own furniture, their own photographs, their own life. Then, over Labor Day weekend in 2013, there was a knock at the door. Standing on their doorstep was a woman they had never met. Her name was April Parks, and she had come with a crew and with a piece of paper. She announced that the Norths would be leaving their home. Not eventually. Now. They would be moving to an assisted living facility by order of the Clark County Family Court. The Norths had no idea what she was talking about. They had never seen this woman before. They had never been to court. No one had called them. No one had warned their daughter. But the paper in April Parks' hand said she was now their legal guardian. And in the eyes of the state of Nevada, that meant she didn't just have authority over their schedule or their address. She had control of their money, their medical care, their mail, their entire legal existence. Two adults who had raised a family, paid their taxes, and broken no law had just been transferred, like property, to a stranger. How is that possible? How does a person you've never met become, legally, more powerful over your life than you are? The answer is a court process called guardianship. It exists for a real reason. Some people genuinely lose the ability to care for themselves. But in Nevada and in many states, the machinery had a flaw. A petition could be filed without the person even being in the room. And in the case of Rudy and Rennie North, that is exactly what happened. April Parks had filed an emergency petition claiming the couple could no longer handle their own affairs. Her evidence? A letter from a physician's assistant, someone who had seen Rennie exactly once. One appointment. The hearing that followed lasted about 10 minutes. 10 minutes in a courtroom the Norths never entered, before a judge they never met. And when those 10 minutes were over, April Parks was their permanent guardian. Witnesses to these removals described the same scene again and again. A person with a court order, a crew, and a clock. Pack a bag, leave the rest. The house and everything inside it now falls under the guardian's control. For Rudy and Rennie, 57 years of accumulated life, the furniture, the keepsakes, the paperwork, the privacy, stopped being theirs in the space of a single morning. They were driven away from their own front door like guests who had overstayed. Here's what makes this story bigger than one couple. April Parks was not an amateur. She was a professional guardian. This was her business. Over the years, courts had placed hundreds of people under her control, hundreds of wards. She kept a calendar of them the way a salesperson keeps a pipeline, and every hour she spent managing her wards, their bills, their appointments, their paperwork, she could bill, not to the court, to them. The money came out of the savings of the very people she controlled. Think about the business model hiding inside that arrangement. The guardian decides what the ward needs, the guardian provides it, and the guardian pays herself from the ward's own accounts. The person being billed has no power to object, because legally they no longer speak for themselves. The Norths watched it happen from the inside, their house, their belongings. The life they had built for 57 years, converted into invoices. Rudy and Rennie spent 18 months in that assisted living facility in Boulder City. 18 months. And by the time the guardianship was finally suspended, most of their money was gone. What saved them wasn't the system, it was their daughter, who refused to accept that her parents could simply be taken. No one had warned her. She had to discover for herself that her parents no longer lived in their own home, and then fight a process that treated her, the daughter, as an outsider with no standing. Because that is the cruelest twist of guardianship. Once a stranger is appointed, the family itself becomes legally irrelevant. Visits can be limited, questions can be ignored. The guardian answers to the court, and the court, overloaded and trusting, rarely asks. When she finally pieced together the paper trail, the pattern was unmistakable. Every service billed, every hour invoiced, a life liquidated one line item at a time. Families like hers began to find each other across Nevada, and they found reporters. Local journalists in Las Vegas started pulling at the threads. Then in October 2017, the journalist Rachel Aviv published a landmark investigation in The New Yorker that put the North Story and April Parks in front of the entire country. People read it with the same chilling thought over and over. This could be my parents. This could be me. And then finally, the machinery of justice turned around. A grand jury in Nevada indicted April Parks on more than 200 charges. Prosecutors laid out how a court-appointed protector had systematically drained the people she was sworn to serve. Parks pleaded guilty to dozens of felony charges. The woman who once controlled hundreds of lives was sentenced to spend up to 40 years in a Nevada prison. The North's got something rare in these cases: a name, a conviction, a sentence. In a separate Nevada case, one family even won $8.5 million over guardianship abuse, and the story broke out of Nevada entirely. In 2018, John Oliver dedicated a full segment of his show to guardianship abuse. It has been watched nearly 7 million times. Netflix built an episode of Dirty Money around guardianship scams. Hollywood even turned the scheme into a thriller. The film I Care a Lot, about a predatory professional guardian with a wall of wards, felt so plausible precisely because it barely had to exaggerate. The culture had learned what the Norths learned at their front door. But here is the uncomfortable truth this story leaves behind. April Parks went to prison. The system that empowered her did not. Guardianship still exists in every state. Reforms have passed in Nevada and elsewhere, but the core mechanism, a court hearing you may never attend, a document that can override your entire adult life, is still on the books. You may have heard echoes of it in the biggest headlines of the past few years. A pop star fighting her own conservatorship in California. A famous talk show host's fans demanding answers about hers. Different cases, different facts, same machinery. To be fair, Nevada did respond. After the scandal broke, the state passed reforms, including the right of wards to have a lawyer of their own, someone in that courtroom whose only job is to speak for the person everyone else is speaking about. Other states have followed, but advocates will tell you the same thing, quietly, after the press conferences end. Protections on paper are only as strong as the attention of the busiest judge in the building on the busiest afternoon of the week. The paperwork that ended the North's freedom took 10 minutes. The paperwork that won it back took 18 months. So remember the lesson of the knock at the door. The Norths were not poor, not reckless, not alone. They were ordinary homeowners with savings, which, in the wrong system, is exactly what made them a target. The most dangerous documents are the ones signed in rooms you're not in. A piece of paper took everything from Rudy and Rennie North. Another piece of paper, a guilty plea, took April Parks' freedom. Paper giveth, and paper taketh away. We read the fine print, so you don't have to. Subscribe, this is the fine print.